From Clyde Golden, I'm Tim Yaden, and this is Input Doc. It's the podcast where we explore what marketers need and what agencies provide. Hi everybody, this is Tim. Today I'm chatting with Jerry Johnson. He's the owner and principal consultant at Cascade Strategies, a market consulting and strategic planning firm based in Bellevue. Jerry, something I find really intriguing about you is that you've had a long career as a business owner, and that also you're an early adopter of AI and machine learning for marketing purposes. We met we actually met once, maybe 10 or 12, 15 years ago. I think that I was a copywriter who was looking for guidance on becoming a strategist, and somebody recommended I chat with you, but I can't remember who it was.
Might have been Matt Fontaine.
Matt Fontaine.
He had the same issue, as it were.
Okay.
He was a writer, and he wanted to become more of a strategist, and that would fit the time frame, roughly. Yeah. But anyway, might have been Matt.
I remember it being a sunny day, and we sat at a Starbucks, and you were really gracious and helpful. And that's my memory of you.
Well, I'm glad I was. Now, not always, but I'm glad I was.
Well, on that day. Since then I was a copywriter and then became a creative director, and I've never actually become a strategist, but I do run a business, and I think a lot of those skills crossed over in time. I think there was a moment where I figured out that, you know what, maybe I'm a creative director and maybe I like it. Maybe I'm just strategic.
Sure.
This is okay. So 15 years later, I'm coming to grips with being a creative director. I'd like to know a little bit about your origin story and what led you into research, and are you self-taught? Do you have formal training? Just love to hear your story to start with.
Well, I'm in Seattle now, or the Seattle area now. I am originally from Florida, North Florida, kind of cracker country, as it were. I traded corners of the country because I didn't like to sweat so much, and certainly I'm sweating less. Business-wise, I started the company, Cascade Strategies, as soon as I got here, as soon as I got to Seattle. And we did the usual. Focus groups, phone surveys, mall intercepts, retail intercepts, anything. I mean, I would do, bathrooms, windows, floors, anything to feed the kids, as it were. The practice developed, I guess, because the economy developed. By the mid-90s, the economy was going well. And it enabled us to do a lot of the futuristic things we wanted to do. And a lot of that had to do with biometrics. That in those days, what we were pursuing were biometric analysis coupled with advanced modeling. And so we attracted a different kind of clientele, slightly more, if you will, slightly more enlightened clientele. They were interested in those things. I don't think that our interest in biometrics and advanced modeling in the middle 90s was natural to market research. Market research can tend to be very plain. Anyway, that carried us to the 90s. And then in the 2000s, we advanced still further into machine learning.
Can you real quick describe what biometrics are?
When you take information directly from the body, and in effect, you don't have to ask. Market research, certainly, it seems to me about 95% of market research is asking questions like, did you try it? Do you like it? Will you buy it? What would you pay for it? Is this or that intriguing to you? Does this message resonate with you? And in feeling that answer, there are so many biases, and market researchers know this, they just keep going. But there's so many filters and biases, like, for example, environment, past experience, personal predilection, and other biases that are cultural, that may even have to do with the types of people you like to hang out with and the types of people you tend to believe. So you often get an answer fraught with all those filters that has error in it. And biometrics, I won't say biometrics don't lie, but you get the information unfiltered. For example, you get a read on arousal immediately from the amygdala of the brain, and it's not fraught with any of those filters. So in many cases, you can just show people something and use neural tracking, galvanic skin response, eye tracking helps, that sort of thing, and just determine what the arousal is without asking.
Are you placing monitors on people and then chatting with them versus purely observational?
That's exactly right. The monitors are on the people.
Oh,
Sure.
interesting. So they are in a little bit of a closed loop where you've put a little anxiety on them, putting them in with monitors on them, and then you're going to, I suppose that's just known and dealt with.
Yeah, well, good point. Anytime you carry out one of these studies, there is a prep period. And sometimes you just gab for 5 to 15 minutes and you're not recording anything. People just settle in. You do the same thing with a lie detector test.
Uh-huh.
And then, there's a period where you just gab.
Have you administered lie detector tests also?
Well, no.
Or just an example.
No, we have witnessed lie detector tests, but something entirely different is being measured there. Anomalies are being measured there, and I can go into it if you want. But basically, it says brainwave anomalies are being checked in a lie detector test where we are really measuring levels of arousal. It's different.
Interesting. Interesting. So to ask questions and then read them biometrically. So it sounds like that type of work, you've expanded upon that type of work over time.
Yeah, we've applied more advanced models to the data. We've applied AI models to the data. Previously, we were applying linear models to the data to try to figure out what the data were telling us. So an example would be, now, although it's later in time, the example still holds. For the 2016 election, we applied the methodology to the choice of Clinton versus Trump. And again, the question comes, I mean, it's a long story, and yes, how to interpret the data, how to interpret the data meaningfully, but it takes a while. But at the end of the day, it renders a natural result having to do with a degree of movement or degree of resonance. It actually predicted Trump by 0.4 points. And we publicized that in October of 2016. Most people ignored it because it didn't fit their narrative.
Was this primary research you did on behalf of Cascade or on behalf of a client?
Client, Texas Tech University.
Oh, interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. They had a number of things they wanted to know about candidate inflections, but they also wanted to know at the end of the day, where was the greater ultimately it's greater arousal, but that doesn't explain enough. It take an hour to explain how you get from one place to another, but you want to know at the end of the day what residue still remains in the mind such that they remain positive when they go into the voting booth.
Oh, interesting. Like what's the leftover id, I suppose.
The lasting effect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You want a more permanent effect rather than a momentary. Arousal we can measure, but we have to use modeling to figure out what does the arousal really lead to.
So these are the kind of riddles that people are coming to you with.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. I mean, whether they're in travel or tech or retail or finance or whatever, that's what they want to know. They want to know what people really feel. It's ironic that in politics, they really don't. They really don't want to know what people really feel. That would be an hour-long discussion in and of itself.
This is an appropriate moment for this conversation where the Democratic National Convention was just kicked off last night, I believe. So your point is they're looking to double down on positives or double down on a negative, but they don't really want to know. Maybe you can re-explain that for me.
Look, I can give you a case in point, and it will help. So broadly speaking, they want an outcome, a research outcome that supports their narrative. They have pre-existing narrative. Everybody does. There's nobody left really, who reports things straight, as it were. So that's the, overarching statement. The example I was going to give is of the Clinton campaign itself in 2016, where they had their data center in Brooklyn already had really good information from not just us as a research company, but easily 20 to 30 research companies that were gathering data and interpreting data, warning them of significant problems in swing states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, etc., and providing prescriptions, ideas of what to do. They ignored everything. Didn't fit their narrative. So that's just an example. They don't want the truth. The truth would be shore up in those places, which they should have done.
Sounds like a worthwhile research project to figure out why they don't want the truth from your perspective.
Yeah. There's some literature on it, and there are a lot of opinions on it. And there's some literature on it, but it's hard to pin down.
Do you feel that, you'll have really solid research and it's handed up and then it's simply taken as advice, or it's not weighed enough, I suppose. Because so when I do some content strategy or the team works on something, I have observation, I have some research that's provided to me, I have some life experience, I come up with everything I can, and together I have to come up with some sort of point of view, which is a really thumbnail of what we do. But do you find that in a situation like this, that you're sitting here and you're like, I have a good sense of why things are what they are, and I'm not being taken seriously? Is that the common plight of a researcher?
You just described the dilemma right there. Not always the case. As I mentioned enlightenment before, and there are degrees of enlightenment available in decision-making in the American economy as well as the world economy. But the more enlightened the ultimate decision maker, the more they let themselves be surprised by results. I mean, it's a naturally occurring thing to be surprised by results. That's why you do exploratory research, and not to mention diagnostic research in the first place. But use euphemisms and keep the language kind. You're less enlightened, as it were, or less ready to make decisions when you're less ready to be surprised. So if you're already on a track and you already have a narrative, and all you want to do is corroborate your instinct, then you can get any number of hack or flack researchers to do that. You can get hundreds of them today. It's quite a different matter to be truly exploratory and to let yourself be moved or surprised a little bit by results. That's what the Hillary Clinton campaign did not do in 2016 with their data. And I'm not referring to policy decisions. I don't think I'm competent to get involved in that, but I'm competent to talk about data. And they had a lot of data providing a lot of warning.
Were you working for that? You worked for Texas Tech, but were you working for the Clinton campaign as well?
No, not directly. No, there's a network of subcontractors, and we were just gathering data.
Understood.
So 20, 30 primary contractors were all working for Robbie Mook and the campaign director. And then leagues of subcontractors under that. We were among the subcon, but we could see the data and we had opinion. They asked us, what's your opinion of the data? And we would render opinions. They just ignored it.
I read somewhere, somebody said, and I believed it, was that when you're sitting at a table with a group of people or your team and an idea comes out that actually really makes you nervous, chase it.
Yeah.
Go take a look and figure this thing out and figure out, is there something there? All right, so are you working on 2020? On any research for the election? And are you allowed
No, I'd love to, but in 2016, there was a nascent interest or incipient interest in applying biometrics to to the data and to some of the decision making. It's really faded. I wouldn't say it's vanished, but it's faded. Maybe it's too shocking or too surprising. I mean, really, if you look at it's very interesting that you actually have a catalog of information to look at. You can go back and, historically speaking, go back to a month like August, September of 2016 and go to the Real Clear Politics website and just see the rundown of the predictions that had been made at that time. There were easily 50 to 60 predictions of Clinton by X points. Anywhere from 3 to, in some cases, 15, 18, that sort of thing. There were only 2 for Trump. Only 2. The fact that the pollsters, using their methods, usually telephone survey methods, were so far off, helps explain the interest in other methodologies. And it's not in effect in 2020. There's very little interest in alternative methodologies right now. It's essentially phone survey method.
There's no index blending various types of research. It's primarily phone survey.
No, not that I know of. So, and we to participate in that, it would be a cattle call. I mean, we can certainly go get data and we do work for other campaigns. Oh yeah, other campaigns, but nothing having to do with the presidential campaign and nothing having to do with the networks. Even the networks are leery of biometric research. Some good people at the networks know that it'll pin down the truth of voter sentiment, but it doesn't support their business culture or doesn't support their narrative. Again, everybody has a narrative these days, but it doesn't support their narrative to get that truth. It's more helpful to get advocacy from research, and that's what they get now. You get advocacy from research.
Are we going to see a move towards more advanced research methods as candidates get younger?
As candidates get younger?
Yeah, like say millennial candidates running for president, or I think Kamala Harris would be our first Gen X candidate. I think Obama was probably a boomer. I'm curious if it's a symptom of our current candidates. I believe are 73 and 78. It could be that if their campaigns reflect, the ethos of the candidate, that perhaps they're going to stick with what they've always used to get where they got.
Well, okay, certainly we're going to see more candidates from Gen Y and Gen Z. No question about that. I don't know if campaign decision making has changed very much. People still want to win, and they have a sort of structural approach or incremental approach to winning. And I haven't seen much evidence that candidates in Gen Y and Gen Z are more open to more advanced methodologies. They still seem to, they listen to their campaign managers, which I think is wise. They listen to their media directors, and I think there's some wisdom there, mixed wisdom there. But I still don't see much evidence that in terms of methodology, they still have a narrative. I mean, again, if you take extremes, you can take extremes of right or left, but if you take people who have let's just say a far X, far right or far left point of view, Ayanna Pressley or AOC or somebody like that, they haven't shown any indication that they want to get at the truth with research any more than a conventional candidate from 20, 30 years ago.
I feel like someone like AOC at the moment just simply has a handle on voter sentiment.
Well, in her district.
At this moment in time.
She does in her district.
Okay,
she does quite well in her district. As a matter of fact, she wins by significant points in her district. And of course, the usual methods of polling that were used for her first election were way off. They were off by 15, 18 points. They were way off. It was the pollsters who didn't understand voter sentiment, but AOC did. So I'm not sure that I would say I'm confident that she understands voter sentiment broadly in the entire country. But in her district, she certainly does. Same is true of Ayanna Pressley or other members of the squad. So they understand their districts extremely well, but those districts are pods. They're petri dishes.
Well, they only have to be reelected in their district.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and then if they have the ability to speak nationally, they can take that with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, just to circle back and keep it simple, I don't see many signs of enlightenment among campaign decision makers or decision-making ranks. They seem to be pretty conventional.
To shift gears slightly, but along the same line of questions, corporations, companies, curious about adoption of advanced research methods over time. Are you finding that enterprise companies are way out ahead of politicians? Yeah.
I think in the private sector they are, or at least the proportions are better. I think you can find a larger proportion or percentage of enlightened thinkers or thinkers who are willing to give a little time, give a little thought to advanced methodologies. We're not thrown out immediately, as cranks or what have you. I mean, that certainly does happen. And I think some of that comes from a certain exhaustion with methods as they are. I mean, how long have we had the survey method? I mean, we're talking, going on 100 years or so of some variant of the survey method, even if very crude. And we've had variants of qualitative methods like focus groups. We now do a lot more online because of the coronavirus, that sort of thing. But the method is still there. I think there is a certain exhaustion with what those methods have produced in terms of insights. The insights don't seem to pop as decision makers expect them to. I don't think the decision makers understand how the new methods work, but I think they look at the outcomes and they see that the outcomes in terms of insights that allow them to beat their competitors are better. They're sharper. They're more actionable.
I'm curious, during the coronavirus, so the last 3, 4, 5 months, are the types of questions you're getting different, or how has this impacted your company?
The questions are different. Macroeconomically, there's a general decline. We all feel a little bit of decline, and certainly our company is no different. But beyond general observations on the macroeconomy, the questions have changed. The kinds of insights when we're in growth mode, and it's certainly the economy, the American economy, it goes without saying, has been in growth mode for a good 3-4 years solidly. A lot of the questions had a great deal to do with that growth mode, meaning how can I make more? How can I attract more clients? How can I make prospects into customers? How can I get the current customers to pay more, et cetera, et cetera. And those are legitimate growth mode questions. And a lot of the questions now are in survival mode. So travel is a case in point. If some of the questions that were asked over the last 3 or 4 years of, say, hotels or airlines or rental car companies were things like, how can I get more from the economy? How can I get more customers or get them to pay more? Now the question comes for hotels, for example, it becomes who wants to travel at all? And for airlines, it becomes who wants to fly at all? Well, that's a survival mode question.
And the two groups they feel like different phases to me. I can fly and get there, and I might be okay with that, but where am I going to stay?
Oh, yeah. Oh, sure. Well, you're pointing up a reason why there is. I mean, I hate to say it's fairly macabre to make the comment, but it's true. Business death is simply a fact. I mean, in the hospitality business, there are companies that, because of coronavirus, they just die, they just pass. So, I mean, that's why survival mode questions are asked. Who wants to stay at all?
Well, early on, I started reading and began Googling phrases like recession marketing or, like what should I be doing as the economy slows? And the insight that I came back with was don't stop marketing. Less people are talking, there's more chance of a share of voice. And that less effort is probably going to get you more, same amount of effort is going to get you more. Are those the types of things that people are thinking about, or is it primarily you're getting reached out to by people trying to survive?
Well, that's a piece of advice that's been given in every recession. However, the recession, now I'm not sure, we're not clinically speaking or numerically speaking in recession right now. It's just that we've had massive drops in GDP, which may come back. We don't know. But in periods of loss, in periods of decline, that's the advice, the marketing advice that's been given, as it seems to have some wisdom attached to it. And don't stop talking. Continue to market, Is it echo chamber advice, or is the situation different this time and there's different advice that you would give? It's a little different this time because some people, this is why I say it's fairly macabre, or dreary of me to comment on it, but some people are going to die anyway. And that's brutal. Sorry. But some people are going to die anyway. It's just not positioned to live further. When you have an external variable, a virus, it just halted everything. Okay, so it's not purely an economic, or macroeconomic factor that caused the decline in 2008. There were decidedly economic factors that caused the decline. Okay, this is an external variable that just causes the train to grind to a halt. The train just doesn't move forward. So it depends. It's like musical chairs. Where were you when the music stopped? If you were not in a good place when the music stopped, then the chances of business death are just high. So it is a different condition.
That resonates. We were in a good spot when the train ground to a halt, which allows for a long stopping runway, I suppose. But there's probably a question of luck of when does the train get going again?
Well, what I might add to what you've said, there is a piece of advice that suggests don't stop marketing. As a matter of fact, your comment about share of voice, I think is accurate. Personally, I think it's accurate. You will gain share of voice because there are fewer people shouting. I think I might add to that. Don't be afraid to look around the corner. This is a good moment to do that. Look into the future and ask yourself what you should worry about. So if we're in time one now, there are a lot of people, as a matter of fact, I think most people are focused on the danger now, danger of few clients now. decline of numbers now, decline of revenue now. Okay, T1. Well, what about T3? If you can find a way to survive, and most actually will, then you should not stop asking about what you should be worried about in time 3, maybe 3-4 years ahead or even more. And that's what the advanced methodologies are really good at, particularly AI. AI is outstanding at exploratory research and building exploratory models that will tell people what they should be worried about soon. Great example of failure to do that is the coronavirus itself. I mean, when coronavirus, just when the bad news struck, and minimum bad news struck in even December of 2019, but by February 2020, the news had struck, and in fact, the CDC's reserves of PPE, masks, ventilators, et cetera, were low. You could question how that came to be, but I won't do that now. It's just like, where were the voices? And they could easily and well have been strategic planning and research voices to say, some time ago, we should have replenished those stocks because this will hit. And exploratory models are very good at providing those warnings. And these were not things that were the few that were around, and there were not heeded. So that's a case in point right there. Back to the main point. The main point being, you should not stop asking what's around the corner. You should ask what's around the corner. What should I be worried about now? Because it's going to be a problem 3-4 years from now.
So for your company, Cascade Strategies, what type of variables are you chewing on? What are you thinking about?
A lot of them are social science variables, sociological variables, behavioral variables, sometimes economic behavior, sometimes cultural behavior, et cetera. They can have anything to do with travel, purchases, where you live, how long you live there, things like that. But these are variables that contribute to something new on the horizon called latent effects modeling. And there's some interest now. It's incipient. So I'm talking now, it feels, I'm not sure, but it feels a little bit, this is reminiscent of our being back in the 2000, roughly 2000 period when we were saying, look, machine learning is going to become very important. AI will ultimately be important, but as a precursor, machine learning at minimum will become very important. Let's start doing some things now. And most people just yawned. In 2000, the economy was still roaring, and they said, we don't really need to know much about futuristic methods, blah, blah. I think we're in a similar moment where something like latent effects modeling is available to talk about, and there's incipient interest, but people it's almost like mentioning big data for the first time in the late 90s. Or data mining. They don't know what it is, but they know that it has some sort of promise. But that's a method we use, and we tell our clients that it's beneficial.
You've written that you want marketers to get over their fears about artificial intelligence. And can you describe what that means and what some early steps are, or some things they can do to become more familiar and at least have a sense of how to start the conversation?
Well, it's a hard one to start because I understand where their fear is coming from. A lot of the fear has to do with just direct cynicism. And by cynicism, I mean lots of people in the marketing realm don't think AI has application to what they do. They think AI has application to the hard sciences, and it does have far more application to the hard sciences than to the soft sciences. So when you're talking about security issues, when you talk about fraud detection, when you're talking facial recognition, and a variety of process control, things like that, AI is really terrific and has terrific direct application. And that's an easy conversation to have, very easy. People can see the connection between what AI does, even if they don't understand the modeling characteristics of AI. They can understand an outcome, and they can see the connection between an outcome and their decision-making, if it's the hard sciences. But we're in the soft sciences. We're insight-driven. We want to know whether a message hits. Does it resonate? Does it move you? Will you buy? Why will you buy? How many will you buy? What created your interest? Will you tell others? That's the soft science. That's not hard stuff. Okay, so most people in marketing think that AI really does not have application to what they do. It does because there's strong evidence that using AI improves the utility of the insight. The insight has more direct application to decision making, and when you apply it, you actually beat competitors. But that's still a cloud. That's still a mist for them right now. It's very ghosty. It's like a film for them right now.
It still feels like I need a specialist to come and do this for me versus this is something I can do myself.
Right. Well, even in the hard sciences, a lot of decision makers don't have the luxury. Some of them do, but most of them don't have the luxury of being able to use internal staff for a proper application of AI. That's true, still true in the hard sciences. So if you're in fraud detection or something like that, but it's very true in the soft sciences. So if you're basically in some of the realms that I just mentioned, like travel, tech, retail, et cetera, many times you do not have staff that can apply those AI models to deriving better insights. You do have to use a contractor. So if you want to do it correctly, you can do it crudely. You can do it badly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Even beyond insights. So I've been a copywriter for a long time. How will AI impact the life of a copywriter?
I want to avoid cruelty in the words that I choose, but I still want to speak the truth.
Let me know what's coming.
A lot of functions, if not people, well, people won't be eliminated, but a lot of functions will be eliminated. Okay, so AI supports robotics in a very strong sense, and there are bots or robots who can do things that humans could do, and they were judgmental things, requiring synthesis of information, conceptualization, and so we're getting into that realm right now. And that used to be kind of a protected realm because people used to say, well, my job's fine because I take pieces of knowledge and I synthesize that into something else. So if I get a creative brief on the creative side, if I get a creative brief and have a chat about where we're going strategically and I understand the realm we're in, I basically take some time and think in the wilderness about that's what synthesis is. But there are machines that can synthesize now. So it's a little bit frightening. I mentioned the hospitality business. There are a lot of people in the hospitality business who for some time have seen the elimination of functions coming apace. And we call them future fearfuls, but they're right to be fearful in that sense. There are a lot of functions that are just going to be gone.
I don't know that I'm fearful as much as I know it's coming, and therefore, how do I place myself halfway between a client and AI with the skill set that I have? I feel that, or my gut says that AI is a tool that scales and helps us do things on a greater level. But there's a moment that only a human can provide empathy.
Well, you'll remain indispensable if you can always ask yourself the question: what is a campaign? I mean, 50 years ago, a campaign used to be the things that, Young and Rubicam in New York and J. Walter Thompson cooked up. So for cars, there were car campaigns. They made you lust after a car, so you wanted the car. And there was a lot of physicality to it. There was even physicality to the creation of the instrument, the creation of the spot, a radio or TV spot or the print vehicle or what have you. And those things are gone. Well, they're not entirely gone, but they're largely gone. So again, I think it would be indispensable to clients if you can keep that question in front of you: what is a campaign? Today, campaigns are essentially virtual. They are whatever method you can use to tweak the brain of somebody who is browsing something, and that something is typically online. It's not always, but typically online. So a lot of the vibrancy, color, vivacity, vividness, et cetera, has come out, but the desire to provoke the brain is still there. So if you can get atop the funnel and just say, look, I can help you with that. And there are ways if you offer handbags to the market, there are ways of getting more eyes and minds focused on your handbags versus others, but they're not the ways of 40 to 50 years ago. So if you do, you'll just discover what the methods are beneath that. You'll be indispensable. Whether you're a copywriter or designer or what have you, you'll remain indispensable. You're leading the client and they will pay you. They will pay you for those services.
It's a question, or would you agree that it's a question of knowing how to apply these tools in the spots and then being able to apply an insight to it?
As a matter of fact, I mentioned latent effects modeling. You really you don't, as a copywriter or creative director or designer, what have you, you wouldn't necessarily have to know about the guts of a model, about how to actually apply a model. But if you knew what it was, you could remain indispensable, as I say, by saying, look, there's a way to do this right. It's handbags, right? Yes, it's handbags. You want to sell more handbags? Yes, I do. Okay, you want to feed your children? Yes, I do. All right. That if you do what most people do, which is run digital campaigns ad nauseum, just try this, try that, because it's cheap, because it seems free to you. And it is in some respects free. And you run, in a year's time, you run maybe 100 digital campaigns or 150 digital campaigns in support of your handbags. Okay, like, look at me. Okay, I have the best or the highest quality or the ones you want or what have you. To remain indispensable, you have to be at a level where you say, look, that's not what I do. What I do is I peer into those campaigns and I tell you which ones really ought to have been. There were probably 5 that really should have survived, and the rest you could have pitched and not wasted time. And that's a latency. Whether it will implant in the minds of people a positive idea that they will retain when they're ready to buy a handbag, either now or later. Okay, that is a latency, and that's why latent effects modeling works. So it's a fancy term, and you don't even have to use it with a client, but the fact that you knew it made you indispensable to that client. You see what I'm saying? You get above the fray. You know there are methods down there. You don't spout the methods all the time, but you're at a level of understanding that the client needs. So they'll pay for that.
It's helping them understand which one of the signals and responses were actually effective, and we should chase further.
As a matter of fact, there's just an awful lot of diarrhea in digital marketing now, as you would expect. I mean, because the popularity is so high. I mean, now we have literally millions and millions of digital campaigns from, tens of thousands of companies, and they do essentially come down to a useless soup or a diarrhea of things. There's not that much probing into what really is providing a latent effect. A latent effect would be something. Now, I mentioned the 2016 presidential campaign. That's what we were trying to measure for Texas Tech University. We didn't really care about in the moment response, like Trump just spoke, do you like him? Hillary just spoke, do you like her? We didn't care. What we cared about was something very difficult to ascertain, but with advanced models you can. And that is part of core memory that you retain positively. So when the moment of truth comes, it's there resonant in your brain and you can deliver it there. That's a latent effect. It's very hard to discern, but it's possible to do.
I guess after 30 years, what would be the future of research?
Far fewer humans, I hate to say that, far more robots, and far more questions about questions. In other words, what are appropriate questions to ask? So I mentioned synthesis of knowledge or synthesis of learning. We have robots, we have AI built machines these days. They're incipient. They don't work perfectly well right now, but we have them that can synthesize knowledge, so they can determine what's the next most appropriate question. If you have a great interviewer for a network, for example, like Chris Wallace or somebody like that, that great interviewer discerns what's the next best good question to ask. And that really was basically, so in nanoseconds, his brain is just firing off. The neurons are just firing like crazy to think that's the last. I asked the question in this context, that's the last thing that the last thing my subject said. What's the next best thing to ask? Machines are now capable of synthesizing knowledge in that way. Again, it's incipient and not working at a high level. But because we have those types of machines that are now available, and there'll be more of them, there will be less human involvement in asking the questions that market research typically asks right now, even down to what's the best price.
It'll be our job.
What's the coolest feature, or what's the most resonant message?
It'll be our job to determine the objective of the line of questions.
That's right. And that's what I was saying about indispensability. As a creative person, you will remain indispensable if you can get above those methods. And you can say, look, I know what the methods are. I know what the panoply of methods is. So I know where the client wants to go. I had the example of handbags, but there are all kinds of examples, shoes, whatever you like. Okay. I know where the client wants to go. Now I'm in a position to say, I know how to turn minds toward you. I know how to use the internet and other modes to turn minds toward your handbag or your approach to handbags. I'm not going to get into a lot of the science or scientific words or what have you, but I know how to do that. And that's indispensability. And that's a future indispensability. Less useful, and that's a bit of a cruel word, sorry, it's a bit of a terse and mean word, but less useful, unfortunately, is the practice itself. The practice of writing out the words that may be used in an ad, or attaching a graphic, or determining what the ad itself might look like, because those are functions that are going to be done by bots. I wish it weren't the case, but they are.
Do you feel that's primarily limited to marketing, communication, persuasion versus film or longer storytelling, poetry? Like AI addresses prose and humans address poetry.
Yeah, well, I think that the use of AI or potential use of AI is attenuated in those cases, because that's long pattern thinking. That's long way of thinking. So if you're an author and you have in mind a book, then you have in mind thousands and thousands and thousands of patterns of thought in your head. You know, so what's character development going to be like? What's the plot going to be like? What kind of crisis are we going to have, et cetera? No, machines are not very, at this point, speaking here in 2020, year 2020, machines are not really very good at that level. Those are long-term patterns of thought. Like one long-term thought connects to another. You know, the overall theme connects to character development. Character development connects to the crisis. You know, crisis connects to the denouement, et cetera, et cetera. These machines are not that good at that.
They're not going to surprise me with a great story.
Correct.
But they're going to have a sense of when I'm most vulnerable to a specific message or sentiment.
Yeah. So a quick example of how that works is if you had a novel written, and I might annoy people with a novel I choose, but let's just say Huckleberry Finn. If you read a paragraph, an AI machine ingests or hears or absorbs that, you might be surprised at how good a question they might feed back. Why did Jim say that at that point? Why were they on the river? You know, why did they add those people to the raft, et cetera? AI machines can do that now. What AI machines are poor at, bots, in effect, are poor at, they're poor at developing the story further.
Yeah.
Like, Jim and Huck were on the river. Where should they go now? Well, that's pure imagination.
If I gave them the signal that rapids are coming, the machine may say, let's get off the water.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the story should divert here. You can get a bot to do that. Say, okay, the rapids. The bots can think that out. They can say, well, if there are rapids and they die, then the story ends and there's nothing left to do. They can figure that out. So they should get off here and they should go into the town. So this is fun. We could spend 2 hours just on that.
This alone is an existential question of mine, in which I see AI is here. I'm a creative, and I'm just curious how our roles are going to work together. You know, how do I get out in front of this? How do I use this as a tool versus it using me?
Every creative at every level needs a brief. I mean, you can always just go into the bathroom and think it up if you want, but good creatives are desperate for good briefs. You know that, you're a creative. Okay, AI can help produce a better brief. The kind that, you've seen hundreds, if not thousands of these. You know when you have a yawning brief, like, oh, brother, it's butter, and we're supposed to say it's creamy, right? Okay, yeah, et cetera, et cetera. But then there are some briefs that just light you up. You say, whoa, I had never... the use of a product for that's going to stun people. I can work with that. Wow. I mean, really, you get your juices flowing. AI can help you produce that kind of a brief, which helps you return a better service to the client. That's part of what I'm saying about getting above the methods and just knowing the methods are there. So you can use AI to produce a better strategy, which ultimately means a better brief.
Well, thanks. That went really well. And, post-pandemic, we should sit down and have coffee again, and I'll come back to you with 500 more questions.
Yeah, I'd be pleased to do that. That'd be fun.
Thanks so much for joining me today. And you can find more about Jerry Johnson and his work at cascadestrategies.com. Thanks again, Jerry.
Okay, thank you.
Input Doc is produced by Megan O'Neill, edited by Lily Chu. The music you're listening to is an original creation by our very own Brian Leahy. We'd also like to thank our project manager, Scott Greger, who does all the work at the agency while we make this podcast. I'm your host, Tim Yaden. Have a great day.